for sticking around. Our next bird-tongue reader is Leah Ranier. Leah Ranier is an East Coast native, poet, and student who's been living in Portland since 2012. She has read her poetry at various events hosted by Curtis White Carroll, including Word Warriors and Ink Noise Review, and with Jenny Forrester and Unchased Readers. She has also been a part of KBOO's Talking Earth Radio and has a small self-published chapbook, Literary Voyeurism. Please welcome Leah Ranier.
Leah Ranier, but that's my favorite mispronunciation. I think it's much classier. So I am a poet, but I'm going to read prose tonight for the first time ever. Hello. I'm a little nervous. Oh, I don't know Tom, so I don't have anything to say about him, but I do know Sage. We go to school together. And he's one of the sweetest, kindest, most wholehearted people I get to encounter in that building, so my love to them both. This is a sad and hard story about a close friend of mine who died a few years ago. And if that is a subject matter that's hard for anybody, please feel free to take care of yourselves. I stood up from my bed, lost. My room was suddenly too big and too small at the same time, and the floor was the only place where I felt able to exist. I clutched my body and let out a full-bellied yell. Certain it was a mistake, I picked up my phone to scroll through our last text conversation. We had just talked yesterday. The timing couldn't make sense. She had told me she had the flu. It was a regular conversation just like any other, and it didn't make sense. Sometime later, a friend sent me a link to the article that our local newspaper had published about her death. It had the most up-to-date reporting of the incident, and it was sent to me with a warning that it was a graphic story. I would be lying if I told you I hadn't ever imagined she might die too soon. She was the sort of friend who talked about death a lot. She lived in a basement apartment and read a lot of Bukowski and would occasionally send me pictures of herself in the mirror in an unbuttoned flannel, a flat little stomach, and a simple bra with a caption saying, "Alcoholism does the body good." She was racked with guilt about her student loan debt because her parents had co-signed and they already didn't have much. The way she saw it, with a bachelor's in English, the only way out of debt would be if she died. She was hopelessly in love with a straight girl with long dark hair who made pendants out of bullet casings and crystal points. For the amount she drank and talked about death, there are certain storylines that would have saddened me but which would have not surprised me. This is not one of those stories. The article began as most articles about dead people do. It recounted her accomplishments, acknowledged her family, and explained that she had just moved to New Orleans from her hometown only a few months ago. The man's name was Henry, but he went by Hank, and I'd tell you his last name, but I never bothered to learn how to pronounce it. The picture of him was small, but you could tell he was bulky with a swollen brow. He was black, and I wouldn't tell you that except that it's relevant because police response rates to domestic abuse calls in black neighborhoods in New Orleans are significantly lower than the response rates to the same sort of calls in white neighborhoods, and maybe if they had shown up one of those times his ex-girlfriend called them, I wouldn't be writing this story. Hank had an impressive record, mostly drug charges and grand larceny, one attempted murder charge that had been dropped in '93. He had spent his most recent stint in jail on charges involving heroin and had been released a week ago. His ex-girlfriend worked with Lauren at a restaurant, and the two had been living together for a few weeks while Lauren was between places. The newspaper reported accounts from their co-workers saying that Hank would come to the restaurant most nights, drunk, threatening to kill his ex-girlfriend. No one took him very seriously, and maybe this night wasn't the first night he broke into the apartment, but it was the first time anyone had been there. She had the flu. That part is important because if she hadn't had the flu, she would have gone out after work like the other nights, drinking too much and being in all the places that are supposed to be the wrong places at the wrong times. This night, she was home, in her bed, with the flu. He broke in looking for his ex-girlfriend. Lauren was not his ex-girlfriend. She was a small-statured 26-year-old lesbian who wanted to be a published author and who had moved to the city on a whim after growing tired of upstate New York, and who just happened to be there. Wrong place, wrong time. No one will ever know what was said. When the police finally found him a town over, he confessed right away, saying that she had argued with him and provoked his rage. Lauren wasn't much of an arguer, and even so, I can't imagine the sort of rage it takes to kill a person with a nail file in your fist. I can't imagine what brings a man to squeeze life from the neck of a stranger in her bed with the flu. I can't imagine it. I won't imagine it when I try. I can't tell how far away my toes are, and my stomach folds over on itself. My body feels like an empty bag, and I can't fill it. This story happened 3 years ago, and now I'm 1 year older than she was when it happened, and I'm still so young. It happened before I understood the complexity of friendships between queer women and the way we can understand the subtleties in each other's stories. Before I knew how we hold on to each other and why, and that things are rarely ever completely platonic. There were mornings I'd wake up in bed at my parents' house in a room which was not the one I grew up in and feel myself wishing she was there. I didn't know her well enough then to know what I was wishing for, but my body had already developed the innate understanding of a momentary urge to share intimacy with a person who understands your subtleties just by nature of understanding their own. In a way, I loved her. I was afraid of her a little bit because she lived so fully in her emotions and I hadn't learned how to do that. Now I think of her small bones in a box in the cold earth by an old abandoned steel mill and our friends who raised the money for her tombstone because her parents couldn't afford it, and that's not the sort of thing you ever think to save up for in advance. I wrote her a poem and put it in a plastic bag and put the plastic bag in a tube in the ground that's meant to hold flowers. It has rained and snowed and rained and snowed and rained again, and the paper is disintegrated, but that bag is still there. An empty bag where a poem used to be.